Welcome, everybody, to the Right Path podcast, where being an actual author, still matters. This is the podcast that's for authors, it's about authors, it's by authors, and it's where we share our journeys, it's where we explore our creativity, and where we examine the why behind it all. Folks, our guest today, he is a writer, he's a screenwriter, he's a producer, and he's the author of the upcoming adult historical fantasy novel called To Conquer Death. And that's due out very soon. Looks like November of 2025. By the time this podcast comes out, I'm guessing this book's going to be out. All right. And if not, very, very close. So, folks, please welcome to the show Richard Moon. Richard, how are you doing, brother?
Hi, Rory. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm doing very good, actually. Looking forward to the book coming out November 18th.
There we go.
I'm throwing pre-order links everywhere I can, and doing much more promotion than I've ever had to do for a film, and that's okay.
I mean, you're covering all your bases right there. That's fantastic. So November 18th is the big day. That's set in
Yeah,
stone. Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
yeah. That's
Perfect.
when it releases.
All right. This podcast will be out before then. So I love
Oh,
that. That's
cool.
perfect timing.
That's great.
All right then. So we'll get that done. Certainly want to talk about that. We have a lot of things that we can cover. Richard, before we get started, go ahead and just let everybody know who is Richard Moon? What are you about? A little bit about what's your story.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm one of those very rare beasts. I'm a person that got involved in the film industry, and while being a native Southern Californian, I was born and grew up in Southern California, and was not actually focused on getting into movies. I went to UC Riverside and got a physics degree because that's like my other great love is physics. And when I was coming out of college, it was in that wonderful time period right around the turn of the century where you know a lot of the research jobs were entry level, which means we want 5 years of experience. And I just kept like bashing my head against a lot of the research jobs. I had discovered in college that I didn't want to go into grad school. So I was kind of at a loss for a little while until I stumbled into getting hired to co-write a screenplay with another independent filmmaker who'd made a couple movies. I had been writing my whole life and had gotten into screenwriting in college as a hobby, like as a side bit. Um, and the guy, I don't even remember how we connected, but he liked my writing. I liked him. We wound up writing a script together that unfortunately has never gotten made, but it's
Mm.
gotten close to getting made several times. But that got me into that realm, and I started just writing full time. Um, and right around 2008, 2009, my wife and I both decided she wanted to get out of the job that she was in at that time, and we both decided that the time was right for us to get into film production. Because we
Wow.
had some avenues towards getting some financing. We she had been a project manager at UCLA. I had the writing side of things taken care of. So we started up a company and started producing some short films and produced a feature film that I had written. And for the next 10 years or so, that's what we were doing. We were getting films made, we were working on other people's productions. And it was never like we were never like Hollywood, you know, power or anything, but it was a fun time. And then we both started getting a little burned out on that, and to the point where like we were trying to get one movie made where it was like the swamp castle scene in Search for the Holy Grail. It's like we'd get it set up and then it would fall apart, and so we'd get it set up again and then it would fall apart again. And that's film production. That's always the way it goes. Um, and but this one just kept falling apart to the point where 2020 came around,
Oh,
and once everything shut down because of the pandemic, I actually, for myself, had a moment of, oh, thank God, I don't have to keep trying to make this movie. I can stop. Everything had fallen apart. And at that point, I realized because of everything we've been doing, I hadn't written anything for myself in about four. My cat. Um, I said, I'm backing away from production for a while. We're not going to be going into debt trying to get movies made. I'm going to refocus on myself. And that year I wrote three screenplays just often, out of my head. And I started working on this book, which had been a film treatment, previously, and it had been kind of set aside because I was like, there's no way I'm getting this film made. That's my cat. Just I said, this is more of a book than it is a movie. Let's work on that. And so now, 5 years later, it's coming out, and it's been through a lot of the ringers. And I'm kind of like I said to you before we started. I My whole career has felt like I'm starting over again and again and again. I'm starting a new thing every time, and this has been yet another time where I'm like, I don't know anything about publishing. I don't know anything about you know really the publishing industry, and I'm the new guy, and I'm a debut author, and I'm almost 50, and that's okay. I'm always happy to get into the new zone and meet new people. Yeah, so like these are the first sets of podcasts I've ever done, because when we were making movies, it was not a thing to go on podcasts to promote them.
Right.
You had to get them into film festivals. Now I find myself submitting the book to book festivals, and I'm like, oh, this takes me back to the short film days. It's the same process, just not quite as organized, but that's okay.
I got you.
Yeah. So yeah, and this whole time I've been uh, you know I'm like I said, my wife and my kid just graduated from college, and they've always been kind of my focus. I'm a big, family man, and as you can see from the background, I'm a cat owner. We actually have too many cats right now.
Gotcha.
Um, and the last thing I'll talk about is that this year, getting this book published is not the weirdest or most impactful thing that's happened to me, because in January, my family, we lost our house due to the Eaton fire in Altadena.
Wow.
And we've actually said now that if that hadn't happened to us, if we hadn't had to evacuate with all of our cats, we have actually four cats, which is too many, and two dogs, um, and had to deal with everything coming out of that, I probably wouldn't be getting this book published right now, because it was um, in March when a festival was down at the LA Convention Center, AWP. I was like, all right, I'm not sitting on my hands feeling sad for myself. I'm going down, I'm meeting people. And that's where I met the hybrid publishing company that I decided to go with,
Uh,
Atmosphere Press. And they've been great and tremendous, and put the book through the editorial ringer, which is exactly what it needed. And like I said, now it's coming out, and I'm like, so if January hadn't happened, would I be publishing the book now? I don't know. You never know, but I like
right.
to think so.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you and your family made out of that safe because,
Yeah,
goodness, out
thank
here in
you.
Indiana, we heard about all of that, but we didn't have to experience any of it, of course.
Yeah.
That had to be just horrific.
Oh, it was terrible. I mean, it was experiencing a tiny little piece comparatively of what a whole lot of people have been experiencing and are going to be experiencing. My wife and I talked about the fact that on a technical level, yeah, for a little while there, we were climate refugees. And again, we have a lot. We're in a good place. We
Hmm.
could afford to get an apartment. So I'm not like trying to maximize our difficulties, but at the same time, it was, yeah, it doesn't. When you have a hurricane force winds and a wildfire, it doesn't care what your economic level is. It doesn't care about even what the infrastructure around you is.
Yeah.
um, it wiped our town out for a good long while, and things are getting built now. We're in the process of rebuilding,
Oh,
but
great.
it's been a tough year, and I'm glad I'm able to almost get distracted from all of those troubles by dealing with all the troubles of getting a book published.
Right. Has to keep it in perspective for you, though, I would imagine. A lot of people think that the
Yeah,
book troubles
definitely.
are like really, really bad, but you're probably like, hey, I got this. Compared to what
Yeah,
we're dealing with on the home front, this is nothing.
yeah, yeah, very much.
Yeah. The hybrid publisher that you brought up, I was going to ask you, what you chose because everybody has,
Mhm.
like at least three choices between full publisher, hybrid publisher, self-publishing, and then there's grades in between of kind of doing all the different things. What was it that
Yeah.
attracted you to the hybrid publisher that you're with now in terms of what they offered, what you did, strengths, weaknesses, all that kind of thing?
Yeah. So what I really liked about the whole process and the concept of the hybrid publishing is that I had already been kind of trending towards thinking about self-publishing,
Okay.
um, just because I wanted the control and like the not so much the revenue, that's not the biggest part of it, but the control over it. I have in the last 5 years, I've seen enough from traditional publishing that I'm like, I wouldn't mind going in that direction, but I'm also not necessarily interested in pursuing it hardcore, simply because, you know, like every industry, traditional publishing is going through problems right now, and every industry is. So when I was thinking about self-publishing, my mindset, even coming off of film production, was um, I gotta, put the professionals together. I got, it's not going to just me like doing the editing. I need somebody else's eyes to edit this book. I need
Sure.
somebody else to come up with the cover art. I those are not my skill sets. I know what my skill set is, and when you put a film together, you can kind of tell when somebody's like, "I'll do every single job myself to save money." It's like, yeah, but you don't like 90% of those jobs. You don't want to do those, and that's where I'm at. So the daunting thing about self-publishing was the idea of, to meet my own standards, hiring a good pro editor, hiring a good development editor,
Hmm.
proofreaders, line editors, all of the things to get things together. And with the hybrid publisher, it was like, oh, this is I can actually engage the professionals who have all those resources and know all those connections, and I'm still paying for it, but I was going to be paying for it anyway. But now I'm engaging people that I can vet and I can talk to other authors about,
Uh,
and they are the professionals who love what they're doing, and I'm not having to find them and vet them. And so that was just a tremendous thing. It was like all of the things that worried me about publishing myself were taken off of my plate, and it was like I can put have the crew together that's going to be working for me, and it's been a tremendous process. I'm so happy with everything that they've done. They've been extremely responsive to all the things I wanted, especially going through the cover art process was, oh, my fear with in films, it's like key art is always going to be the dangerous thing. Is that poster going to speak to you or not? And the same thing, I was like, I need to have the image that speaks to me. And we went through a good solid several weeks of back and forth on what it is, and it came together beautifully. And yeah, it's been a great process. And at the end of the day, even though it's not a large multinational corporation that's going to be pushing the book in 16 different directions, it's still the book is done and it's out there, and I get to choose how to push it out. And that's
I
having
see.
that control
Yeah.
is just tremendous. It's wonderful.
That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
everything you're talking about, I think that the vetting part and the networking piece of using a hybrid publisher is
Yeah.
something that really is underrated. Everybody gets so wrapped up in
Yeah.
the percentage of book sales and this type of thing and that the money becomes such a pronounced issue when you're negotiating that I think people forget that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like you really have
Yeah.
leaned into that advantage.
Well, and I would say it's born out of experience, because I've on various projects I've worked with people that you know I shouldn't have hired. That was hiring that one person. That was the mistake. That's the one that's what's causing problems. So I'm, like I said, very appreciative of any time I can have a set of professionals that I can talk to other people about and that they have experience with, and we can get a sense of it. Um, because man, there's just nothing better than working with professionals who are actually like really good at what they want to do and that they want to do it, and that aren't going to bring along some huge interpersonal baggage along with it. That's great. And nowadays, with everything being online and the internet, sometimes it can be hard to find the person who's really good at promoting themselves, but is maybe not so good at the actual everything else part of it. So yeah, like I said, that was one of the things that super attracted me to Atmosphere, is just the ability to know what they're on about.
Yeah. I mean, that's great that you had that experience in the with the idea of what you were looking for and sort of the concept.
Yeah.
So that part wasn't, anything that was a surprise to you. But I'm curious, even though you had sort of an idea of the value of the service of the hybrid publisher, was there anything that sort of surprised you that you got into and you're like, oh, I really didn't expect that, good or bad? I'm just curious.
Um, Actually, the promotion that they have that they have been involved with has been like I totally wasn't expecting. I was figuring that the worst case scenario that you hear about hybrid publishing, um, well, the actual worst case scenario is it's a scam and they just take your money and they give you shoddy
Right.
product.
Yeah.
Thankfully, not the case in this instance. Um, but there's some really good companies out there. But that I was figuring, well, what I'll have at the end of this process is a book. And yes, I will have paid for, the production of it, but I'll have the book. And at least everything else I'll figure out afterwards. But they are so supportive beyond just the having the book. I mean, they part of and yes, I paid for all of it, but at the same time, part of what came with me paying for it was, a whole marketing plan that was, again, I haven't done a book before. I was not, if someone said, how are you going to market this book? I would have said like, um, I'll figure it out.
Right.
But they have marketed books, so they have a whole marketing plan put together. They've, submitted it for awards. They've been pushing it through social media. They are the ones that help me figure out how to engage avenues like podcasts, like book festivals. And so it's the post production support has been really revelatory for me. This is not something I was expecting to get. Like I said, I was figuring that I was going to be on my own after the book was done.
Right.
But they're like, nope, you're part of the team, and at the same time, the social aspect of what they put together is great too. That they are very much about connecting their authors together in uh, uh, you know the social circles. So there's a lot of mutual support
Gotcha.
and admiration. So like the first time I got another atmosphere author, to write a blurb for the book, I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. This is amazing. I don't even know this person. They read the book and they loved it. So woo. And then I got to do the same thing for another author, and it was like, this is cool. I really like being able to do this and lend my name to it, even though my name isn't anything right at the moment. But
No,
other
that's
than
great though.
somebody read this book and liked it, that's cool.
Right on.
you know,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a heck of a networking opportunity, to
yeah,
put that all together. Let's talk about the book itself. It's adult historical fantasy novel. So I mean
yes,
that says a lot in a very short little stance. Historical makes me think you're doing quite a bit of research on this.
oh yeah.
Adult fantasy novel. I mean, you've got some exciting characters or something. What can you tell folks? Let's start with this. What can you tell folks about the book? That maybe goes a little bit beyond the jacket cover, but doesn't give away the
Yeah,
secret sauce, right?
yeah. So to get into it, where this book came from was there was an event in history at around 1190 BC called the Bronze Age collapse,
Okay.
where in the course of about 30 years, all of the ancient civilizations around the Mediterranean, except for like Egypt and a few others, they faced a whole wave of migrations. There were droughts. There was a whole thing, and all of them were gone. So like the Mycenaean Greece, Crete, the Hittites, the Assyrians, all that, they all collapsed, like I said, in the space of about 30 years. And it's this big historical mystery. We know a few things. We have bits and pieces from some Egyptian records, but we don't know a lot of the gory details of what happened. And I'm the kind of guy that I read. I just inhale stuff like that. I like reading about little moments in history, and that one stuck in my head the way it sticks in a lot of people's heads. And the basic idea that started forming around it was, well, what if those waves of invasions weren't invasions? They were migrations. They were refugees. What if they were
Mm.
running from something worse? And then, because this is the way my brain works, it became, well, what if they were running from what amounts to a Bronze Age zombie apocalypse?
Hmm.
So that's the basic setting of the book, is that there's a zombie apocalypse happening, and all the Bronze Age civilizations are getting overrun. Um, and these two brothers from ancient Egypt, um, who are warriors and going to protect their land no matter what, basically have to join forces with these two women who are barbarian Europeans. They're from Europe. They're nomadic, but they've been on the run from this darkness their whole lives. And they come to Egypt to try and escape it, and are just stealing everything they can. All their people are just stealing everything they can to keep moving. And they get defeated and caught, and basically conscripted to be guides to take these two Egyptians back along their path to figure out what's causing all these problems, what's causing
Oh,
the
wow.
invasions, what the source of this darkness is. And so the whole book winds up being a travelogue back along the route of their migration, while these four people also deal with a lot of their internal issues and their own trauma. A lot of the book is about how we respond to death and grief, because all four people in their own way haven't dealt with big moments of grief in their lives. And the book actually starts with three of the characters as kids experiencing their parents dying.
Oh,
One of
wow.
their parents died. So it wound up being, like I said, a meditation on grief and death and trauma and purpose, like finding what your purpose is going to be. Um, and at the same time, because it's the sort of thing I love to read, it's an adventure story with a big evil at the end that they have to defeat or overcome. And I think it turned out to be just a real fun adventure on top of everything else.
Nice. Wow. I mean, that's holy cow. Of course, I was going to ask you where you got the historical part from, but it sounds like that's something that you came across that just really grabbed you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it
I
really
love that.
did. And I spent several years with just Bronze Age collapse, zombie apocalypse as the core idea without knowing what the rest of it was. Because that's often how a lot of my stories come about, is like have this plot idea or a setting idea, and like, but there's no story there yet. There's no characters. I don't have that. And then
Yeah.
as I'm working on other things, some aspect of character comes out. I'm like, well, okay, so what if it's a guy who's doing this and has this problem? What, how would they react to that sort of thing? And as those little bits and pieces come together, then a story like emerges out of there. And as I said, this actually started off as me thinking, oh, this would be a great, big adventure movie. And I wrote up a whole treatment as a feature. And I wound up looking at this treatment at one point and saying, there's no way I'm ever going to get this made. This would cost $150 million and
Wow.
be 3 hours long. It's That's insane. Um, I was, just in the treatment, I was like, I'm gonna have to cut out so much stuff to fit this into a feature package. But then when I decided to turn it into a book, it was like, oh, I have to expand all these ideas and start thinking,
Right.
and yes, as you said, the research requirements for my own satisfaction were just immense. I wound up buying so many books and reading through so many books and getting very familiar with Egyptian poetry, of which we have
Okay.
a lot, and mythology and storytelling. Yeah, and there was a lot of research involved. Yeah,
Sounds like it. My goodness. Now the zombie apocalypse, and all that you're telling us kind of where that came from. The central theme amongst your characters, where the idea of the grief and overcoming that and loss, is that something that comes from you? Is that a piece of your life, or is that something you've observed? Where does that enter the picture into your book?
it it's something I've always been interested in exploring, in a lot of different uh, stories that I've written. It's just because it is such a central element of the human experience. A lot of times we deal with the fact that we're all going to die, but we sometimes don't deal with the fact that we all know people who are going to die, that everyone in our lives are
Mm.
going to die. And that's, that's life, but that's also, you know, hard and grief and I I appreciate the old joke about, a man will do this, that, and the other thing to avoid going to therapy, which is very true. But in my case, I'll write a story about, the most heartbreaking thing you can ever imagine to avoid actually having to, or not to avoid it, but as a way of dealing with it in my own lives, even when I haven't necessarily experienced that heartbreak. If I can push it a little further than anything I've experienced, then that gives me a little more defense against, when the bad things happen in my life. It's self therapy, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you're insane and want to write all the time because it's a bad habit to start. You
Yeah,
never
there
you
you
never
go.
stop. But yeah, nothing specific. And interestingly, a lot of my stories, I often get asked, well, what's the autobiographical element of this? And I'm like, nothing much. I've never been to Egypt. I don't never had to fight in a Bronze Age battle. I don't shave my head. I'm not I'm not a nomad, and that's okay. I don't need to experience all those things. That's why I wrote the book, to experience them vicariously.
Right.
Um, but yeah, really, in a lot of ways, grief is something that I've always been interested in exploring in my writing. Even when I'm, making a joke out of it every once in a while. But and that's where this came from, thinking about, what's the worst thing that, especially in the Bronze Age, someone could see, and it's, having the dead not be at rest. And especially when I started thinking about like the Egyptian approach to mortality and grief, that is the worst thing. If the dead aren't, buried in the right tomb, and their souls can't find their body, that's a terrible thing. Their name, getting erased, that's a terrible thing. So taking these guys who are, in the most powerful empire in the world at that time and saying, hey, by the way, your core beliefs are, they're wrong, or they're not as solid as you thought they were.
Yeah.
That's where I love to go. I love taking a strong character and scaring the crap out of them. Yeah.
Okay.
And making them
Um,
sad.
are you in your book?
No, I am not.
You're not.
I never do the self insert. Um, I don't begrudge anyone who does do that, but it's just not my deal. I don't. The closest I get is sometimes a character is, around 6'2" and maybe has brown hair. But other than that, yeah.
Okay.
I prefer to let elements of my personality and my friends' personalities inform different characters rather than saying, here's you, you're in the book now.
Gotcha.
Just not my bag.
All right. No, it sounds like you have a definitive opinion on that. So good deal. All right. So there's no Richard
Yeah.
in the book. Maybe a couple pieces of him here or
No.
there, but none of these
Yeah,
characters is you.
definitely in
Gotcha.
everything. Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. I mean, this is when you have this kind of research that has to go into it, and then you also have the creativity of, the fantasy aspect of it, and you've also got all of the underlying themes, like we just talked about the grief and so on. There's a lot to do with a book like this. So I'm curious what your process was, because there's the sitting down and writing. There's the Gary V idea that, hey, if I sit down and I focus and I write for an hour a day, I'm gonna, I'll have my 1,000 words, then I'll have 100,000 words in 100 days. But you can't just sit down and write because you have to do all this research and you have to figure out how that plays in, and
Yeah.
then you have the creative process. What was your overall process for doing everything that had to go into this type of a publication?
Yeah. So a lot of it was, as I said, I had the basic plot setting idea. And in order to find characters, I knew I had to know more about that space first. And so that's where the research started. And I started reading more about Bronze Age collapse and the Bronze Age world at the time and all the little details. Um, there's a wonderful book I found called 24 Hours in the Life of an Egyptian that was uh, actually set in the Middle Kingdom. This is the New Kingdom, but that's unimportant. And it was 24 stories that were illustrating an hour in the life of somebody in ancient Egypt and what they were going through. And it was just a great resource simply for the knowing little details, most of which didn't never got into my book at all because, I'm not about somebody making bread. Um, but starting there and getting those little bits of research together, once I actually had the story, the character ideas, I have to do what I call pre-writing. I have to do a ton of pre-writing, and that's also the joke too of you see your writer spouse sitting at their chair doing nothing, and they're like, I thought you were supposed to be writing, and it's like I am writing. I'm sitting here thinking about the stuff. Um, so what I would do once everything was like ready to come together and I needed to actually write is I can't sit at the computer and just start writing. And I love the people who can do that, but I've tried to do it and I wind up sitting at the computer staring at a blank page
Right.
for an hour, which is no good. What I do instead is I get up and I go for a walk.
Hmm.
Um, and I actually have tattooed on my arm. You can't see it, but Solvitur ambulato, which means it's solved by walking.
Oh, wow.
And literally, I have to go out, I have to go walking, I have to go exercising, I have to put some loud music on and just work out for a bit to let my brain start assembling the scene that I'm working on by itself. And so I will generally go out for a long walk. Halfway to the end of that walk, I'm sitting down and I'm like writing notes on my phone, or I have a pad of paper with me and I'm writing notes. And I will sketch out the scene that I've figured out in my head while I was walking, and then I'll sit down and for the next 3 hours be translating that sketch into the actual written prose and figuring out how I want to say these things and how which words to use, that sort of thing. And I'll generally get through like 3 4 hours of writing, and at the end of that, kind of come back up out of the fugue state and say, well, God, why does my head hurt and why am I so tired? And it's like, because my brain's leaking out of my ears at that point. And I'll have to take a break. And then the next day, same deal. I know the next scene I'm working on and I have to go for a walk. I have to let it kind of percolate and assemble itself. And then it's sketch out the scene and then sit down and write it and expand it. And you do that day after day after day. And eventually, yeah, you wind up with, 100,000 words put together. And then you read through that and you say, oh, well, I got to go back and fix this up there. Um, but I tend to write very linearly. I start at the beginning, I go through the middle. I don't skip around much. And a big part of that is because what came before informs what I want to do next. And I have to, like I said, go out for the walk and let everything assemble itself in my head. Because if I just sit down and try and force it, it just doesn't come together very well. Um, but that like I said, I tend to get some good production out of that. The book, even though it's been 5 years since I started working on it, the first draft of the book was done in about 6 months.
Oh,
And
goodness.
yeah, it went fast. And then, of course, the subsequent drafts
Well,
just
sure.
take as much time as they needed.
Right.
Um, yeah.
But you
So
you
yeah,
sketched out a rough draft though in 6 months.
yeah, yeah. And that was the fully written out. Like I was sending that to my writing group and my beta readers, and I was happy with it. But at the same time, it wasn't right yet. It wasn't done. It wasn't finished. And that's always the way. You
Right.
can't that first draft. I don't believe in the garbage first draft. The just vomit it out and you can
Right.
fix it later. Just because that's not how my brain works. But at the same time, that first draft is never the finished draft.
Sure. For sure. Well, I mean, you must be in some killer shape because to get that done in 6 months, you must have done a lot of walking.
Oh, I do a lot of walking. Yeah, I'm actually kind of the weirdo in my family because every once in a while I'll be like, oh no, I don't need to park near the place we're going. I'll park. Look, there's parking a mile and a half away. I can walk the rest of it. The rest of my
Right.
family's like, yeah, we're not doing that. You know,
That's not an
like
option, but enjoy yourself. I mean,
yeah,
clearly you're serious about it. You had a tattooed on your forearm. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Very cool. All right then. Now, I love the process. I really do appreciate you being so open about it too, because everybody has their own,
yeah.
and there's, quirks and differences to everybody's thing. What you're talking about is fascinating, the way that it works for you. Now, I have talked to a lot of people who have written books. I've heard a lot of folks process. I haven't talked to too many folks who have put together a screenplay. And I know
Mhm.
you've done that. So I'm curious, if you can give everybody kind of an idea, maybe, what the big differences are between you writing a screenplay and you're writing a novel. And is the process the same? I mean, is it still get out and walk, or are there some differences?
Yeah, I mean, they are extremely different mediums in a lot of
Okay.
ways. But for myself, the process is largely the same. I have an outline. I know what the scene needs to do and what the conflict is it, but I don't know what the words are yet. So I got to get out, get away from the desk, let the words assemble themselves, sketch, then write it out. The big difference for me between the novel and screenplays is really one of medium. Novels are all about those words and painting the picture with the words and spending time and space painting that picture. You have to use the whole canvas. You have to engage people on that literary level of using the language. Whereas screenplays are visual, and I've actually had like students and younger writers that want advice, and the big advice is it's visual. You got to tell me what I'm seeing. If you're not telling me what I'm seeing, then I can get confused in a screenplay. The screenplay is very active. It's present tense. It's not like I said, novels, you're painting a picture with the words. You're doing the same thing in the screenplay, except you're doing it in as few words as possible. That
Hmm.
you can't spend half a page painting a picture of the room because we're only going to spend half a second seeing that room before we're on to the dialogue and everything.
Right.
Um, so you got to get us in, you got to get us out, you got to tell us what we're seeing, you got to move. Um, so it's a much more active medium, writing wise, screenplays, because they are a blueprint for the film. Um, and whereas with books, that's the end product. That's the important part. That is the painting. Whereas the screenplay, you have to it's got to be that recipe that gets you to the painting. So I find them both extremely engaging mediums to write in, and I think the thing I love about both of them is contained in their differences. That I like when I'm writing a screenplay, I'm trying to find if I'm using 7 words to say something, I'm like, can I do this in 4? Can I use one word that will cover this? Can I just like punch you with it and get out of the way and let the empty space of the page do the job? Um, Whereas, when I'm writing the novel, I'm like, okay, let's indulge a bit here. Let's really grab your head. Because the other part of it that I find fascinating is that screenplays, even though this is not like a concrete rule, generally speaking, a screenplay is about 1 minute to a page. Like if you have a 100-page screenplay, it's going to be about 100 minutes,
Hmm.
more or less. Um, Whereas with and that's screen time. And so if you're spending a page on a scene, you're spending a minute on page. You need to be on the next 5 minutes. You can't be sitting in a scene for 40 minutes indulging in whatever's going on inside a character's head because you've still got you know 2 hours of movie you got to get on with. Whereas with a novel, there are no time constraints. The next chapter doesn't have to be the next day. It doesn't have to be 5 minutes down the story. It can be the same moment. You can explore that moment in time from different perspectives, from different you can time interest ways that you kind of can't with a screenplay simply because the screenplay is linear or not doesn't matter. The movie, you sit down, movie starts, it goes on, it finishes. A book, a book could be 1 day and you spend 300 pages dealing with 1 day.
Hmm.
Do that in a movie. I will love that movie. I don't know how you do it, but it'll probably be one of my favorite movies ever. Um, Although I say that, and I think, yeah, one of my favorite movies is like it's actually just 2 days long, but or it's a single day now that I think about it. But that's Sinners. Sinners is one day in the whole
Ah,
movie. But
okay.
yeah, so that's what I was saying is that it's the difference between them is real fascinating, and I love like playing with those differences and how I can mess around with things. Yeah.
Well, I love that. I appreciate you sharing that too. I've always wondered, and as I was, going over your bio, I was like, oh, I really have to find a way to ask this question because I really wanted to know. So I really do appreciate the just the knowledge, that you're bringing to that.
Well,
Um,
I like the question. Like I said, I love almost nerding out about like formatting differences. And I've taken client I've had screenwriting jobs where the job was to adapt a client's book into a feature film. And so I've had those conversations with the client where I'm like, okay, but your book is great, but it's a book.
right.
You're in a book. You're able to cover your entire life. We're not going to cover your entire life in 100 minutes of screenplay. That's, because you'll get about 60 seconds for everything you want to talk about.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, finding the differences between those two mediums is always fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Now, with almost every author I talk to, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, at some point, whether it's the beginning or in the end, or there's someone that you're writing the book to, or someone that you're writing the book for. So, with this book, who are you writing the book to, or who are you writing the book for?
Good question. I would say very simply that I was writing this book to readers like myself who are I mean, I wrote it for myself in that this is the sort of thing I love to read. This is the sort of book I just devour uh, without hesitation. And it was very much inspired by other books that, again, I adore in every way. And it brings together so many of my personal little favorite things, history, mythology, and fantasy, um, that if I know that if I saw this book on the bookstand and I hadn't written it, I would be buying it as soon as I saw it. It would have just grabbed me. Um,
Yes.
and so I really am writing it for people, the sort of nerd like myself who, will read a dragon book and read a history book, and then well, the sort of nerd who will read the Silmarillion multiple times, which is basically a fantasy history book. It's almost
Okay.
a textbook. And then who I wrote it to, it's a different question because I would say I really wrote it to um, those kids, those boys and girls who are, probably in high school, maybe at the end of a junior high, somewhere in there, who are hungry to be like kind of amazed, be presented something they haven't seen before, um, shown a world that they didn't know could exist, that sort of thing. If I get one kid out there who reads this book and is like, I am now fascinated, I want to know more about Egypt. I want to know more about ancient Greece. Um, any of those things, like one person who's like, this is something I haven't seen and I want to know more about all of the other stuff surrounding this, then that's a huge victory and I'm happy. That's really who this is to. That's like who I want to experience this book.
Nice. Great answer, by the way. That was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
All right. You just knocked that one out of the park. Um, okay, I do have, as we kind of bring things, to a close here, I do have one more question I want to ask you. But before we do that, let's get your contact information out there. How can people get a hold of you? How are they going to be
Yeah,
able to find the book? And of course, I'll put all these, links and stuff into the show notes. But in case they're hearing it right now and they want to know.
yeah, no problem. So the easiest way to find the book is I got an author website. It's richardmoonbooks.com. straight up, very easy.
Okay.
You can also find me on Instagram under Richard Moon Writes. I'm on Blue Sky a lot, as that's R Moon Hill is my tag there. Um, and that's the basic ways you can find me, and everything else kind of links together from there, from any of those spots. But yeah, Richard Moon
Perfect.
Books is the big one. I'm
That's the
also
one.
on Tumblr, but I don't know how many people are still on Tumblr. Uh, if you look for Richard Might Write, that'll pop me up there.
Okay. All right. Richard might write.
Yep.
Might, right? Like
Yep.
you might
Yep.
not. Okay.
I might not. You
All
know,
right.
I'm on Tumblr, so it's an open question right there.
Okay. I got you. Last question I want to ask you because I mean, this is a very interesting book that you've put together, and I love the way that you've done it. If you take out the money piece, okay, the income part
Mhm.
of writing and marketing and selling a book, what does it look like? What does it have to look like for you to consider this book a success?
I have a very specific answer to that question, and I don't know if it's going to happen. But the thing that would forever live in my heart as this was a success is one piece of fan fiction or fan art. If one person out there makes just decides to doodle something from this book, that's a win right there. If some, even if it's like slash fic on AO3 pops up that's based on this, super win. Everything else can go hang compared to that. It's like someone comes up to me and wants to option the film rights. I'll be like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's not fan fiction, but that's okay.
I
But
love that.
I no, I'll still like that. But oh, fan fiction, that's the win right there. Yeah,
What a great answer. And oh my goodness, the fact that you gave that answer and that I know exactly what you're talking about, we're both labeled as geeks for the rest of our lives,
yeah,
period.
yeah, pretty
From here
much,
on out. There's just no
pretty
coming back
much.
from that, brother. Oh, I love that. Okay. All right, I love this. So, hey, goodness gracious, folks, writer, screenwriter, producer, author of the upcoming, I cannot wait to read it, to be honest with you, adult historical fantasy novel, To Conquer Death, coming November 18th, 2025. Richard Moon. Richard, thank you so much for being on the
Thank you,
podcast, just sharing the way you have. I love it.
thank you so much, Rory. This has been great.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you, sir. All right. Folks, on the 18th, you got to go out and get that book. I'm going to make sure this podcast comes out before then, so there's no excuse for you not getting that book. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Folks, this has been another just absolutely powerful and authentic episode of the Right Path podcast where the truth still counts and the keyboard calls us home. This is the place where authors, goodness gracious, authors know that every page is a step forward. So let's lift each other up. Let's dust ourselves off and let's move forward together.